You were held back in second grade, weren't you, Denzel? I think America should expect more from the people who dare to speak on behalf of its values. The sentence landed like a thunderclap in the middle of the live Fox Nation broadcast. The studio fell into an eerie silence. Not because the comment was clever, but because it was calculatedly cruel. Tucker Carlson, known for his surgical sarcasm and smug delivery, had just gone after Denzel Washington. Not on policy, not on values, but on something deeply personal. A childhood classroom from nearly 50 years ago, when a young black boy repeated the second grade. The camera slowly turned to Denzel. No outrage, no reaction, just a still, intense stare. As if he wasn't hearing Tucker, but the echo of an old voice from long ago. The voice of a teacher who never asked why his homework was missing, why he nodded off before lunch. The studio audience leaned forward. The host, Carson Green, briefly glanced toward the producers, visibly rattled. Tucker leaned back in his chair like he'd just landed a checkmate on national television. But he didn't know what was coming. A phone call was on its way, from a voice that would tilt the entire conversation. And if you're still watching now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been judged for the wrong moment in your past? If so, leave a comment. Let us know where you're from. And if you believe that truth doesn't disappear just because someone stumbled once, subscribe, because some stories need to be told all the way through. The show was called Voice of Values, Primetime, Fox Nation, a platform where conservative voices spoke freely, unfiltered. This evening's topic? Intelligence, representation, and whether America's standards were crumbling. Carson Green, a veteran host with a history of leaning right, moderated the session. As expected, the center seat belonged to Tucker Carlson. Crisp suit, piercing delivery, and a talent for turning questions into character attacks. Opposite him sat Denzel Washington, no longer the actor on screen, but a public intellectual and cultural icon. A man whose voice now carried more than scripts, it carried weight. From the very beginning, Tucker controlled the conversation like a prosecutor without a judge. His voice dipped with disdain as he spoke about emotional storms in politics, a not-so-subtle shot at Denzel. He brought up a time when Denzel had once cried during a memorial service broadcast. If someone's that emotional, Tucker asked with mock concern, how can they be trusted with national responsibility? The crowd, mostly conservative, laughed. The camera turned again. Denzel didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't fight back. He simply adjusted the mic and said calmly, "Some cry out of weakness. Some cry because they're finally allowed to speak. And some laugh because they have never felt another man's pain." The laughter stopped, but Tucker wasn't done. He pivoted. He went for the past. "I've seen the records. You were held back in second grade, right? Should the world's most powerful democracy put its faith in someone who couldn't pass the basics at age 7? No applause, no laughter. Just silence. How did he even know that? Still, Tucker pushed forward. "Look, I'm not saying kids who struggle in school shouldn't have voices, but national leadership, that should be reserved for those who rise above the curve, not beneath it." Denzel exhaled, slowly. Then he spoke. "Yes, I repeated a grade. Second grade. I remember that day. The teacher didn't speak to me, just looked at the attendance sheet and said, 'This boy's not ready.' No one asked why I never turned in homework. No one asked why I kept falling asleep in class every morning." Denzel's voice remained calm, but his eyes met Tucker's with quiet defiance. "No one asked anything at all," he said. "Not why I didn't turn in homework, not why I kept falling asleep in class, not why I stopped raising my hand." Then locking his gaze on Tucker. "You think intelligence is measured by staying perfectly on track each year? Maybe. But sometimes intelligence is understanding why a child falls behind and having the courage to ask." The studio air thickened. Even the lights seemed to dim. Carson, the host, cleared his throat and tried to shift gears. "Mr. Washington, in your view, how should we evaluate someone's ability to represent others?" Denzel paused, hands folded. "By whether they're brave enough to use the very story they were once mocked for to open a door for others who've never been invited to speak. I'm not here to win applause. I'm here for anyone who's ever been misunderstood, so they know they're not alone." No claps, no words, just a camera catching a third-row audience member. Their hand clenched tightly since Tucker had brought up second grade. The wound had been buried, but now it ached, as fresh as ever. Denzel's voice still echoed in the air when Tucker leaned forward, dropping his tone but sharpening his edge. "Look, I'm not denying your hardships, but this isn't about pain. It's about qualification. Isn't it a paradox that someone who once couldn't pass second grade now lectures America on education? The line sliced clean through the air. Not sarcasm this time, just a scalpel. Would Denzel stay composed? Would he strike back? He didn't. He looked down, slowly turned a page in his notebook, not to read but to steady his hands. They were trembling slightly, but his silence, that was louder than anything yet said. Carson rushed in to mediate. Maybe what Mr. Carlson meant was to talk about standards, not to make it personal, but Tucker didn't retreat. I meant exactly what I said. Mr. Washington is the face of what happens when we lower the bar in the name of inclusion. Second grade was just the beginning. This is about a pattern. The audience stirred. A few called out, "That's right!" Others shook their heads in disgust. Then, Carson touched his earpiece. A signal from backstage. A live audience question was coming in. A young man stood up from the aisle. White shirt, law school freshman badge swinging on a lanyard. Liberty Law School. "I also grew up poor," he announced, "but I never used that as an excuse. Mr. Washington, if you couldn't even pass second grade on time, what makes you think you deserve to help shape the laws of this country?" A murmur swept the room. It sounded like a fair question, but the tone was heavy with humiliation. Tucker smiled faintly, like a chess player who'd been handed a second queen. Carson turned toward Denzel, waiting, but Denzel didn't rush. He turned calmly toward the young man. "What's your name?" The student hesitated. "Dylan." Denzel nodded once. "Dylan, you just used the word excused. Do you really think a 7-year-old chooses the reasons they fall behind?" The room froze. "Do you think a little boy can say, 'Sorry, teacher, I didn't do my homework because I was hungry, because my mom worked nights, because our lights got cut off again'?" Dylan's jaw tightened. He didn't reply. "You don't need to excuse survival, Dylan. You just have to get through it. And if you can, then maybe, just maybe, you come back and lift someone else." Dylan sat down. He didn't say another word. And for the first time that evening, the cameras weren't focused on Tucker or Carson or the teleprompter. They were on Denzel. Dylan said nothing more. And that's when something shifted. The moment when millions watching couldn't look away. Not everyone watching had known hunger. Not everyone had lived through poverty. But everyone had, at some point, been misunderstood, reduced to a number, a grade, a label. Tucker leaned slightly forward, sensing the shift. He tried to reclaim the ground. "Thanks for the touching monologue," he said, "but Congress, in this country, needs decision makers, not personal storytellers." Denzel responded instantly, his voice firm, his posture unshaken. "And that's exactly the problem, Tucker. Too many decisions are made by people who've never had to survive a story like mine. That's why the law keeps abandoning children, just like I once was." This time, the studio didn't erupt. It split. Some in the crowd clapped slowly. Others shook their heads or crossed their arms. Carson Green, the host, tried to stabilize the moment and transitioned to a new segment. Audience submitted questions. A call came through. The voice on the line was slow, gentle, old. "My name is Miss Ruth. I used to tutor Denzel back when he was in second grade." The studio froze. Tucker scoffed. "Oh, wonderful. Another sentimental endorsement." But the woman on the phone wasn't fazed. Her voice didn't tremble. It cut. "Every Monday afternoon, after school, I remember the first day he came in, eyes low, too quiet. I asked why he didn't do his homework. He just said, nothing. It wasn't until the third week that I found out. He hadn't eaten since morning. He wasn't slow, he was hungry, and no one ever asked why." The silence after that line was different. It wasn't awkward, it was undeniable. "I'm not calling to defend him," she continued. "I'm calling to remind you, intelligence isn't about how fast you learn. It's about whether you keep showing up, even when no one sees you." Tucker's smirk disappeared. He reached for his mic, but didn't speak. Carson finally said, "Thank you, Miss Ruth. That was powerful." But Miss Ruth wasn't done. "I'm proud of the boy he was, and the man I see on that stage now. Not because he proved he was smart, but because he proved no one has the right to call a hungry child incompetent." And then, click. The call ended, but the silence stayed. Not a single breath was audible, because now the truth wasn't floating in theory. It had a voice, a name, a witness. The camera moved to Tucker. He wasn't speaking, just smoothing out a page on his notepad, as if trying to write something, but the words weren't there. Denzel sat silently, not triumphant, not smug, just still, shoulders firm, eyes lowered, carrying the weight of a memory. Then, slowly, he reached down. From a weathered bag beside his chair, he pulled out a laminated piece of paper. The top corner was yellowed with time. The camera zoomed in. A handwritten line stood out in the teacher's notes. "This child doesn't need a new school. She needs food." Carson flinched. He looked over at the producers. Should they cut to break? No reply came. Denzel didn't speak immediately. He just held the paper to the microphone, as if to let the audience, both in the studio and at home, read every letter. Then he spoke, quiet, controlled. I've carried this page for 25 years, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't think anyone would care to hear it. Today, someone brought up the year I repeated second grade, and I thought, if they dare to mention it, then I should dare to show them the truth. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, not from nerves, but from memory, and no one in that studio moved, because they all knew this wasn't just a moment, it was a reckoning. The paper trembled slightly in Denzel's hand, not from a breeze, but from the weight of memory. Tucker Carlson stayed silent. His fingers gripped his notepad, but he didn't write a word. He had nothing left to add, nothing that could compete with what had just been shown. Then, a woman in the audience began to cry. She covered her mouth, but the sobs slipped through. Denzel turned to her. No words, just a quiet nod. They understood each other without saying anything, because pain like that doesn't need language. Then, something happened that no one expected. A man in business attire, white, mid-40s, wearing a name tag that read Tom Garrison, Ohio, stood up. He didn't speak. He didn't raise a fist. He simply placed his hand over his chest and looked straight at Denzel. And then another stood, and another. No chants, no protests, no slogans, just people, standing, as if to say, we didn't ask before, but we stand now, not to apologize, but to vow never again will we stay silent. Tucker looked around. For the first time, his face twitched with uncertainty. He wasn't steering the conversation anymore. He wasn't dominating the stage. He was watching it shift, and he couldn't stop it. Carson Green, trying to regain order, leaned forward. Ladies and gentlemen, please, we kindly ask that you remain seated so we can continue the program. But no one sat down, not one person. Denzel turned to the camera. His voice didn't rise. He didn't deliver a speech. He just spoke, as if to someone watching alone in the dark. If you were ever the child who had to study while hungry, if you were ever called slow because of your circumstances, if you ever wished someone had asked why you stayed silent, then I stand here and I have not forgotten you. The audience didn't erupt. They just clapped. Soft, steady, but real. A moment of unscripted unity. Tucker straightened up, forced a breath. I believe we're getting too emotional, he muttered. The issue here is about standards, not personal stories. But just then, Carson received another signal from the production team. Another call. He hesitated, then gave the nod. A man's voice came through the speakers. Deep, clear. I'm a middle school history teacher. Back in '98, I was told to remove a girl from class because she was falling behind. But I refused because all she needed was breakfast. I don't know who Mr. Washington is personally, but I know there are hundreds of kids like him in our system. And if one of them made it through, stood tall, and now speaks for the rest, then he doesn't just deserve to lead. He deserves respect, not mockery. Tucker Carlson said nothing, not because he agreed, but because nothing he could say would undo what had just been spoken by those who had lived it. The next morning, the footage of the confrontation went viral, but not in the way political media usually does. No flashy edits, no dramatic headlines, just a 38-second clip. Denzel Washington holding a worn sheet of paper saying, "No one asked why I didn't do my homework. Today someone dared to mention it, so I figured I should dare to show it." That clip passed 4 million views in 10 hours. The hashtag #HeWasHungry reached #2 nationally. But it wasn't Denzel's supporters that made it historic. It was Congressman Harold Guffey, a far-right hardliner known for ridiculing emotional testimony, who posted a short, stunning statement. I watched last night's exchange 3 times. I'm no longer sure I understand intelligence the way I used to. Maybe we've misjudged too many children just because they didn't answer fast enough. That final line from Congressman Harold Guffey, a staunch conservative once known for mocking emotional politics, shocked the nation. I don't agree with Denzel Washington on every policy, he added, but on this, I think I need to listen. The internet exploded. Outrage spread through conservative circles. Commentators claimed Harold had been emotionally manipulated, but others weren't so sure. I don't think he switched sides, one tweet read. I think he changed his perspective. Just an hour later, Chad Kinter, veteran host of the right-wing program The Patriot Line, took the mic unexpectedly. I know Miss Ruth, the woman who called in. She's not an actress. She used to teach in Garland, Texas. I interviewed her back in 2005 when teachers were quitting because no one would help the poor kids. I remember her words clearly. Everything she said last night, is true. Even the loudest anti-Denzel voices started to hesitate, not because they suddenly embraced his politics, but because his story reminded them of something they'd buried, the kids they once taught, the children they overlooked, the moments they never questioned. Then, the internet gave voice to those who'd stayed silent too long. A TikTok video from a user named @mom3 went viral. In the video, her eyes are red from crying. I used to say Denzel was just acting on camera. I used to think like Tucker, your past doesn't define your present. But when that teacher said she wasn't slow, she was hungry, I lost it. My daughter's in second grade right now. She's been dozing off all week, and I've never once asked why. 6 million views, 18 hours. But the twist wasn't over. That same evening, an old interview clip of Tucker Carlson from 2016 resurfaced, back when he was promoting a memoir of his own. In it, Tucker chokes up as he remembers his childhood. I wasn't lazy, he had said in 2016. I was hungry, and I didn't know if asking for food was something to be ashamed of. The internet went wild. So, when you were hungry, it was worthy of sympathy, but when it became a punchline? An account named @VeteransForJustice posted a powerful image, side-by-side screenshots of Tucker and Denzel, each with their quotes. Tucker Carlson, 2016, I wasn't lazy, I was hungry. Denzel Washington, 2025, I wasn't slow, I was hungry. Below it, one question, what changed? Because it wasn't the hunger. In just 2 hours, social media fractured. One side claimed Denzel was exploiting pity. The other insisted, we're not being manipulated, we're being forced to look at ourselves. Tucker, trying to control the fallout, went live. I don't deny Denzel's experience, but emotion can't be the foundation of national policy. He barely finished the sentence before a college student posted a story in response. If emotion doesn't matter, then why did you write an emotional memoir just to be heard? And the movement spread. Outside politics, into homes, into classrooms, into school cafeterias. A primary school teacher wrote, I don't care who's right, Tucker or Denzel, I just know one thing. From now on, I'm not scolding the kid who falls asleep in class. I'm asking, did you have breakfast today? 2 days after the broadcast, posts flooded educational forums, but they weren't from politicians. They were from elementary teachers, lunchroom staff, single mothers. A teacher in Mississippi wrote, yesterday I asked my second grader, are you sleepy? She said, no ma'am, I just haven't eaten. And I didn't know what to say. A single mom of 3 posted anonymously, I used to watch Tucker Carlson every night, but the moment that man, Denzel, held up that paper, I cried because 10 years ago I wrote the same words on a food assistance application. She needs food. The hashtag #NotStupidJustHungry exploded across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. But this time there was no single leader. No one claiming credit, no iconic face, just countless small stories. Quiet, yet hauntingly similar. As often happens in politics, when a story spreads too fast, someone tries to stop it. A program on Freedomcast, known for offering a real conservative perspective, aired a heavily doctored video of Denzel's interview. They dubbed over Miss Ruth's call with a sarcastic voice. She didn't do her homework, hungry or lazy, maybe just another tearjerker. This is Congress, not an orphanage. The video ended with a grim verdict. If Denzel Washington is America's political future, that future is being written with emotion, not legislation. Within 3 hours, the video had nearly 900,000 views, mostly from far-right audiences. But this time, the response was different. A Twitter account known for fact-checking fake news has released a frame-by-frame breakdown proving that the sarcastic voiceover was entirely fabricated. No one from the original program had said those words. The expose was retweeted by respected journalists, and even an investigative reporter from Fox News confirmed, Freedomcast is distorting a real story, and that's more dangerous than bias. The public didn't erupt in outrage. Instead, they acted as one. They reposted the original video. No narration, no music, just the single sheet Denzel had held up, with the caption, "We don't need commentary, just context." Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson vanished from the media for 3 days. His office released only a brief statement. The senator respects differing viewpoints and looks forward to continuing dialogue on educational standards. But the silence sparked a question. Was he really listening? Or just waiting for the backlash to fade? Denzel Washington said nothing more. No interviews, no media blitz. He simply posted a photo of the paper he'd held that day, next to a fresh blank sheet. On it, handwritten words addressed to every second grader struggling to understand math while their stomachs grumbled. Haven't forgotten. And you don't have to prove your worth just to be seen as smart. No hashtag, no caption. But within 24 hours, the photo was shared by over 200,000 people. Among them was Carson Green's daughter, the host of that fateful debate night. She wrote, "My father used to believe strength was an argument. Last night he told me, maybe strength is when someone dares to share a memory they've hidden for 25 years. Schools began posting quotes from the debate, not Denzel's photo, but Miss Ruth's words. She wasn't slow, she was hungry, and no one asked why. In California, an elementary school decided to print that line directly on their free breakfast menus as a commitment. A principal in Boston said, "I don't want my students to carry Denzel's story, but I want my teachers to carry Miss Ruth's perspective." During a private congressional meeting, a young moderate representative spoke up. "We've spent too long debating who deserves what. Maybe the better question is, who just needs someone to ask, 'Why didn't you finish your homework today?'" No one replied, but no one objected. Through all these changes, Denzel remained silent. No media campaign, no inspirational speeches. He simply showed up again. At a routine House committee meeting, no cameras, no reporters, just Denzel, an old suit, and that now slightly wrinkled paper, laminated again, neatly tucked in his left breast pocket. When someone asked, "Aren't you going to respond to the edited video?" he just smiled. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand firm. 1 week after the debate, a photo quietly began appearing across law offices, university libraries, and high school bulletin boards. It showed an elderly woman with silver hair standing in a crowded auditorium. Her right hand rested on a wooden table, eyes fixed forward, looking at her granddaughter seated in the distance. The photo captured the exact moment she laid down an old picture and then turned away. No name, no logo, no filter, no flashy caption, just a single line beneath the photo. Not everyone who missed out on education was unworthy. Some were simply too far ahead of their time. That photo didn't spark waves of likes. It didn't trend on outrage. It didn't cause the usual viral storm. It simply lingered, like the way she stepped forward, then walked away without a word. But truth rarely comes without challenge. A conservative group called the Merit League re-edited the image of the paper that read, "He needs food," adding a faded line beneath, "Manipulated by emotion or awakened by truth." The altered image spread fast. One side praised it, calling it clarity amidst emotion. The other side raged, accusing it of weaponizing hunger for doubt. Just like that, the debate stopped being about Denzel or Tucker. It was about an old piece of paper with a trembling handwritten note. In a classroom in suburban Kentucky, a teacher printed the photo on A4 paper and added her own line. "If a child comes to class without eating, the first thing we should do isn't grade them, it's ask, 'Are you okay?'" At an education conference in New York, the moderator asked, "How many of you have stayed silent while watching a child fall behind just because they couldn't keep up?" Nearly half the room raised their hands. Denzel Washington said nothing more to the media. He didn't respond to mockery or memes. He didn't explain the year he repeated second grade. He let the story move forward, not through words, but through the countless people who saw themselves in it. And maybe that was the strongest response of all. He didn't need to win an argument, he just needed the truth to stand at the right time.